Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a situation of, well, just ultimate chaos, the kind of moment where the rulebook is useless, and we're going to pull out the simple foundational rules that can bring order back from the brink. We're diving deep into what are known as the golden rules of airmanship. These are the core principles that really govern a pilot's decisions, especially when things go catastrophically wrong. And to do that, we have to start with a specific flight, Qantas Flight QF32, November 4th, 2010.
An infamous one.
Oh, absolutely. This was an Airbus A380, the largest passenger jet in the world. It had 469 people on board, flying from Singapore to Sydney. And just 4 minutes after takeoff, climbing through 7,000 feet, something went terribly wrong.
The crew experienced an engine failure so violent, so completely off the charts that they knew instantly that this was uncharted territory.
And that's the terrifying part, isn't it? The failure, the complete uncontained disintegration of an engine was so rare that there was no checklist for it.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the manual.
Right. There was no page to turn to, no step ABC to fix the problem. They were completely on their own.
So how do a handful of people, faced with hundreds of conflicting warnings, blinking lights, alarms going off, how do they manage the impossible?
Well, they fall back on something much more fundamental than a checklist. They fall back on these simple hierarchical concepts, the golden rules for pilots.
And that's our mission for this deep dive.
That's exactly right. We're unpacking these 4 golden rules because they're not just for pilots. They're a universal template for operational safety, whether you're in an A380 cockpit or, managing a high-stakes project. They are a cognitive shortcut through that information overload that paralyzes people in a crisis.
Okay, so let's ground this in the reality of QF32, because the sheer scale of the failure is what makes these rules so necessary. What was that exact moment like for the crew?
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau report gives us the specifics. They're climbing, everything's normal, and then 2 massive, nearly coincident loud bangs. The crew immediately gets indications that the number 2 engine has failed. But it quickly became clear this was much more than just a loss of power.
And this is where it gets really incredible, because the physical damage was just shocking.
Yeah.
What actually happened inside that engine?
It was what we call an uncontained failure of the intermediate pressure turbine disc. So just try to picture a disc the size of a car wheel spinning at thousands of RPMs, and it just shatters.
And uncontained is the key word there.
It's the absolute nightmare scenario. It means shrapnel was liberated, and it was moving at extreme velocity.
So that shrapnel didn't just fly out of the engine. It basically became ordnance hitting the aircraft itself.
Precisely. Those fragments acted like cannonballs. Sections of that disc just ripped through the left wing, the fuselage, the fuel tanks. So this wasn't just a lost engine anymore.
It's cascade.
A total cascade. They immediately lost one of their hydraulic systems, which you need for flight controls and braking. They lost electrical power redundancy. One of the landing gear doors was damaged. And they couldn't even manage the fuel properly. A huge amount of fuel was trapped, making the plane dangerously nose-heavy for landing.
So they're not dealing with one emergency. They're dealing with, 30 concurrent emergencies, all screaming at them from the display screens?
Exactly. And when your checklists fail, or when you are overwhelmed with system warnings, and the crew reported hundreds of them, the human brain just goes into overload. That's where the non-technical skills, the crew synergy, and these golden rules come into play. The fact that they landed that massively damaged A380 safely back at Singapore Changi it's almost miraculous, and it's credited entirely to how that crew structured their response.
The captain of QF32, David Evans, he was very clear about what guided them. He said airmanship had to take over. And that leads us straight to the very first rule.
Rule number 1, the absolute non-negotiable hierarchy of priorities. Fly, navigate, and communicate in that order.
That order seems so simple, almost obvious. But in a crisis, I have to imagine the first human impulse is to jump to communicate, to tell someone, anyone, we have a problem.
It is, but that's where training has to overcome instinct. Because of something called the startle effect. When those 2 massive bangs happened, the crew's cognitive resources were instantly compromised by stress and surprise. If you try to analyze or communicate before you secure the aircraft, you can lose control in those first few critical seconds.
So fly is just about pure physical control.
Purely. The pilot flying, or the PF, their only job at that moment is to maintain the desired flight path. Pitch, bank, airspeed, thrust, everything else is just noise.
The rule literally forces you to filter out the chaos. It tells the PF, your job is just to keep the wings level while all the alarms are going off.
Absolutely. And while the PF is doing that, the second pilot's role is just as important. They are the pilot monitoring, or PM. And this is a really critical distinction from the old term pilot not flying.
PNF, right? Why is that change in terminology from PNF to PM so important?
Because PNF implies a passive role. I'm not flying, but PM emphasizes an active role. The pilot monitoring's job is to be the ultimate safety gate. They're not distracted by the physical act of flying, so they can actively monitor all the parameters and immediately call out any deviation.
So on QF32, the PM was the one filtering those hundreds of warnings.
Exactly. Keeping the PF focused on the primary task, just fly the plane. It requires this intense, shared situational awareness.
Okay, so once the aircraft is stable, it's flying safely, then you move down the hierarchy to the second priority. Navigate.
Right. And navigation is really just shorthand for three essential questions. 1, where are we? 2, where should we be going, back to the airport or to a safe landing area? And 3, where are the hazards? The weather, the terrain, obstacles. For the QF32 crew, that meant figuring out if they could even make it back to Singapore with all that damage and the fuel imbalance.
And only then, once you have control and you know your position, only then do you get to communicate.
Yeah.
And you said this is much more than just a quick call to air traffic control.
Much more. Effective communication is what creates that synergy. It's between the PF and the PM. It's between the flight crew and ATC, sure, but it's also critically between the flight crew and the cabin crew, who have to prepare hundreds of passengers.
And they don't have time for misunderstandings.
No time at all. That's why they use standard phraseology and applicable call-outs. They don't have time for casual speech. If the PM sees a deviation, they don't say, hey, maybe we're a bit slow. They use the required call-out. Speed is low, check speed. It cuts down interpretation time to 0.
And that rigid structure is what allowed them to manage this for hours. But of course, modern planes like the A380 are incredibly complex, highly automated. That has to bring us to the next rules, which are all about managing the machine.
It does. And rule number 2 is deceptively simple. Use the appropriate level of automation at all times.
The A380 is a fly-by-wire aircraft, so it's heavily automated. I'm guessing there are a dozen different ways the plane can fly itself and a dozen ways the pilot can intervene.
That's a good way to put it. You have multiple levels, from fully managed, where the computer does almost everything, to selected guidance, where the pilot gives the autopilot specific targets, all the way down to good old-fashioned manual flying. The rule is about pilot judgment. The pilot has to choose the level that best suits the condition.
But isn't the whole point of these advanced jets that the automation is safer than human hands? I mean, isn't choosing to fly manually kind of admitting defeat?
That's a great question and a common misconception. In a stable, predictable environment, automation is incredibly efficient. But when the environment becomes unpredictable, like, losing half your flight controls, the automation might not know how to cope.
The computer doesn't have a frame of reference for that kind of damage.
Exactly. The pilot has to recognize when the machine is overwhelmed and be willing to take the controls. Manual flying isn't a failure, it's an assertion of high-level command when the situation demands it. The 3 keys are understand the mode, select the mode, and then confirm the aircraft is actually responding.
And that confirmation part, that leads directly to the third rule, doesn't it? Because you're putting commands in, but how do you know the automation is actually doing what you told it to do?
That is golden rule number 3. Understand the FMA at all times. FMA stands for Flight Mode Annunciator.
Okay, what's that?
Think of the FMA as the computer's way of talking back to you. It's a critical display right on your main screen that tells you, in plain text, exactly what mode the autopilot is in right now and what mode it's armed to go into next.
So if I dial in a new altitude, the FMA is where the machine says, got it, climbing to 35,000 feet.
Exactly. And that cross-check is performed instantly by both pilots. It is non-negotiable. If you select a command and the FMA confirms the wrong mode or doesn't confirm any mode, you have a massive problem. The system didn't understand you.
It's so easy to imagine just pushing a button and assuming the plane will do what you want.
Incredibly easy, especially under pressure. Rule 3 forces the crew to constantly verify. What mode are we in? What are our targets? Is the aircraft physically responding the way it should be? The process is simple. Monitor, announce, confirm, and understand the FMA.
It sounds like the pilot monitoring, the PM, is really the guardian of rules 2 and 3, making sure the technology is being used correctly and is working as advertised.
They absolutely are. They are the human firewall for automation failure. They let the pilot flying focus on the task, confident that if the machine suddenly does something unexpected, the PM will spot it on the FMA and say something.
Which brings us to the final rule, the ultimate safety net. What happens if all the procedures, all the checklists, all the previous golden rules, what if they still don't stop a dangerous situation from developing?
Then you go to rule number 4. Take action if things do not go as expected.
This one sounds intense.
This rule is the most challenging psychologically because it can mean overriding a fellow crew member. If the aircraft deviates from where it should be, say an unexpected descent, the crew has to act immediately.
So the pilot flying's first action would be to, what, grab the controls?
Often, yes. Or at least change the level of automation. Maybe go from managed guidance to selected, or just disconnect everything and fly manually. Reestablishing control is key.
But the real pressure here is on the pilot monitoring, that safety gate we talked about. What if the PF is incapacitated or just making a mistake?
They have to intervene. And this is where that crew resource management training is really tested. The PM's action escalates. Step 1 is questioning. Something simple like, are you sure about the speed? If that doesn't fix it, they move to step 2. Challenging, that's a direct intervention. Captain, I believe we are too slow. We need to increase speed now.
The final career-defining step if the challenge is ignored.
Step 3 is taking over. This is the emergency brake. If the PM believes the aircraft is in immediate danger and the PF isn't responding, they must, without delay, take the controls and announce clearly, I have control.
Wow. That has to be an incredibly difficult decision to make, especially with the cockpit hierarchy.
It is, but the training is designed to overcome that. CRM, Crew Resource Management, establishes that the safety of the aircraft outweighs rank or personal feelings. The warning is drilled into them. Never assume the other pilot is aware of a threat. And remember that incapacitation can be very subtle. Hesitation could risk everyone on board. The rules provide the structure so that taking over isn't a challenge to authority. It's adherence to the highest possible standard.
The QF32 story really illustrates all of this perfectly. These 4 simple principles allowed that crew to cut through an unprecedented disaster. They didn't have a checklist, but they had a hierarchy. Control first, position second, communication third. They managed dozens of failures because they stuck rigidly to these foundational rules. It's really the definition of airmanship.
It truly is. It's what takes pilots from just being procedure followers to being true masters of their craft. So to recap, fly, navigate, communicate, use the right level of automation, always understand your FMA, and take action if things go wrong. And underlying all of that is the mantra.
Fly the aircraft.
Fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft.
You know, we rely so much on complex systems in medicine, finance, everywhere to manage risk. But QF32 showed that when the system breaks in a way nobody predicted, the greatest safety net is human synergy and a rigid adherence to simple hierarchical priorities.
And that really leads to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. You operate in your own high-stakes world. If your system broke down tomorrow, if your handbook suddenly became useless, what are your 3 non-negotiable foundational rules? What is your personal professional equivalent of fly, navigate, communicate that will guide you when the unexpected inevitably happens?